welcome to the International Code Council Region 1 and Region 1 radio show. My name is Tim Spears. I'm the host of Region 1 Radio. Region 1 was established in 2014 and we're made up of 3 states, California, Nevada, and Hawaii. That also includes 32 ICC chapters. We're dedicated to excellence in education and engagement to promote a safer environment by bringing code professionals together. This podcast series was designed to highlight individuals and share their experiences. If you enjoy our show, please make sure to rate and review us on Apple Podcasts and subscribe to our YouTube channel. In this episode, I spoke with Matt Wheeler, Executive Director with the California Building Officials, or CalBO. In this episode, we discussed his role as Executive Director, how he works to engage code professionals in the private sector across the state of California, resources CalBO provides code professionals, efforts to recruit new members into the profession, and many other topics. Links to the items we discussed can be found in our show notes. Welcome to ICC Region 1 Radio. How are you doing today?
I am doing very well, thank you. How are you?
I'm fantastic. Well, hey, welcome to the podcast. We've been trying to get this thing scheduled for quite some time now, and I think it's been more on my end. We're approaching the holidays, so things are getting a little chaotic. And so it's good to finally connect and sit down and have a conversation.
Well, I hope it's worth the wait, but I'm thrilled to be here and I'm glad it came together.
Well, I'm sure everybody is anxiously awaiting our conversation, and we'll get it up on YouTube and Spotify, all those major podcast platforms here in a little bit. So, but with that being said, let's talk a little bit about your background. So can you share your background and how you got started and how you became the executive director of CalBO?
Absolutely. Thanks for the opportunity. So let me start out by saying that, I'm a civilian. I'm a layman. I've been CalBO's executive director for 19 years now. So although I'm not a code official, I feel like sometimes I'm an adopted code official because I spend a lot of time with code officials. But my background, I grew up in Colorado. Okay. So I was a Midwestern boy, and then I moved to California to go to college. And after 4 years of rigorous study in San Diego, I moved to Sacramento to work in the state legislature. And I said to myself, Sacramento, I'm going to live there for a year. I'm going to pay my dues, I'm going to learn a few things, and then I'm going to head out and I'm going to go be the big time in LA or something like that. And I still live in Sacramento, and that was 25 plus years ago. Okay. But I worked in the legislature for a while, and that was a good home. I learned a lot about state government. I learned a lot about how the proverbial sausage is made in California, but learned that that's also a marketable skill, and knowing how our government works full-time here in California, the ins and outs, and how as a stakeholder group, a group like code officials can represent themselves and make changes and impacts and protect ourselves, but promote ourselves and also promote interests like ours to the government. And so I took that and I left the legislature and I lobbied for a while. Okay. I would like to say that I started with code officials. I didn't. I lobbied for psychologists. I lobbied for independent hotel owners. I lobbied for roofing contractors, a couple other kind of small business interests, and all of a sudden local government called, and here I am. So I started with CalBO, California Building Officials, as their director of public affairs, and I was the external guy. I was the guy that talked to chapters. I was the guy that talked to legislators, decision makers, anything kind of that public eye. And just kind of rolled into becoming the executive director, where I'm doing less of the day-to-day government affairs and more of the day-to-day of keeping the lights on and keeping contracts decent and keeping our members happy. So that's been my road. I can't complain one bit. Never where I saw myself, as a 12-year-old boy going, what are you going to be when you grow up? Not what I would have thought, but man, it's been a great ride. And I always consider myself very lucky to be a part of such a great community of kind people that care about what they're doing.
So you definitely took a non-traditional approach to kind of get into your role. Now, when you went to college, is that one of the, I guess, what did you study to become a lobbyist and to be able to transition into that role? Because I'm always curious. Being in local government and also being involved in in different state-run organizations and some national organizations, I do have some some connections with people that lobby legislatures to be able to, put forth bills and be able to get them, voted on. So how did you make that transition?
It's a good question. Thank you. Well, my undergraduate major was international relations.
Okay.
So, I mean, as disconnected as you could think, but when you look at what that is,
Hmm.
it's diplomacy, it's policy making, it's public administration. And so once I got to Sacramento, I had the opportunity to finish out my graduate studies. And
Okay.
I actually did it at the mighty University of Southern California in LA. And so I finished my master's and my doctorate there. And so that's where we really got into public administration, systems, organizations, the public sector, and most notably how the public sector engages the private and the nonprofit sectors.
Hmm.
So in my role with Calbo, I kind of touch all three.
Hmm.
I work for the nonprofit, but I represent the public, and we have a big private sector influence and an element there too. So I enjoy that kind of digging into the collaborative governance models and how we can kind of all work together in this profession.
Okay. Okay. Yeah. No, that's always curious. Kind of, when we talk to people that are in that role or have been in that role, and especially as a code official, you always, and those that aren't code officials always kind of want to know, they hear the term lobbyist and sometimes they don't quite understand what that means and what goes into it. And so it's always interesting to talk to people that, like you said, to see how the sausage is made up at the Capitol and be able to get bills out there that definitely have an impact on all of us.
Well, do you know where the term came from? Because I
I
find
do
this
not.
fascinating. So the term
No.
came from way back when Ulysses S. Grant was president.
Uh-huh.
He used to walk every day from the White House to the Willard Hotel, which is
Okay.
right across the street in Washington, D.C. And so groups figured out that he came and had a pattern every day, and he would come over and have his cigars and brandy in the lobby.
Oh,
So they started waiting for him so that when he walked through the door, they would be waiting for him to influence or lobby him on issues that were of interest. And it stuck. The hotel started calling those people
lobbyists.
lobbyists, and it was just people that are trying to influence a decision maker.
I was not aware of that.
Say,
And
I'll
that's
learn all
not,
this
yeah.
anytime.
Wow. See, that's why I love these conversations because I learn something new every day. And, that is one thing that I was not aware of. So,
Glad to hear it. But you're right. It's, the 12-year-old boy doesn't say, I'm going to grow up and be a lobbyist either.
right. Yeah.
It just kind of comes and you
Yep.
figure out, what you can try and make happen for yourself and other people and create a profession out of it.
Well, and I'm the same way. I never thought I think as a 12-year-old boy, I thought I was going to be playing in the NFL. And I am 5'9", and I'm about 230 pounds, but definitely not a formidable force. My 40 time is definitely probably above 6 seconds. So I don't think that I ever had a chance to play in the NFL. But that's where I thought I saw myself, growing up in the Midwest. So, um,
I don't want to say the ship has sailed, but it seems
yeah.
like you're sitting in a pretty good seat right now, so we can't
Yeah,
complain.
yeah. I don't think they're going to call me onto the field at 43. But yeah, you never know.
You never know.
Um, well, so I always ask guests, because especially guests that are in high level positions, there's a couple things. One, where they find balance, but two, kind of what their morning routine looks like, because I think that morning routine really sets us up for success later in the day. And so I'm curious what your morning routine looks like. For me, I get up and I'm really kind of slow in the morning. I have a cup of coffee, and I was talking to my wife the other day. So I go, sometimes I forget to put the filter in the coffee maker, and I start just pouring coffee in the coffee maker, and then I have to scoop it out and start all over because I'm that tired. So I start to make it the night before, just so that way I don't even have to worry about it. But what does your morning routine look like?
It's a great question. Well, my morning, so I have little rugrats. I've got a 5-year-old
Okay.
and a 7-year-old,
Okay.
and we're coming out of the pandemic, right? So
Hmm.
my morning routine 3 years ago looks a lot differently than it does today. But it's basically what we call divide and conquer. I try and get up by 5:30, 5:45 and knock out some emails because when you
Okay.
represent code officials, you learn really quickly that it is an early morning crowd with or
Hmm.
without caffeine. So I try and get the first round out, and then I take a break and we divide and conquer. And my wife has upstairs duty, which means waking little people up, getting them showered, dressed, and presentable. And I stay downstairs and I do the lunches and get that all ready to go and then make breakfast.
Mm-hmm.
So then they come down, one of us takes them to school based on the day, and then we're up and running, right? So
Right.
I've got my first round of emails out. Kids are now at school. I may not look quite presentable yet, but that just depends on the day. But from the pandemic, let's be honest, our whole schedule and time has changed.
Mm-hmm.
And so if I can be at home for the day and work for the day, I take full advantage of that.
Yeah.
Calvo has a team of 7. 3 are fully remote. And even though we have a brick and mortar office that is in downtown Sacramento, close proximity to the Capitol, I certainly go there, but not every day. Because if I can stay home again in a quiet environment and just get more done, I take full advantage of that. So it's, you mentioned balance. It's finding balance. I like being a part of my little kids' lives. I like taking them to school and dropping them off. I like making their lunches. And when that works out, at least at this stage in my life, I take advantage of it. But you find that balance and how you can get other people what they need, get your day as well as other people's days kicked off. And then by the time you can sit back down at your laptop, you've got some more to work with.
Right.
That's how I approach it.
Well, that's actually a good way or a good approach. A lot of us, I'd say it's very difficult to find balance, and I'm kind of, like you said, a lot of us start really early, and many of us go late at night. I seem to find myself checking my email more times than I care to admit as I'm sitting there watching TV at night and then also planning out the next day. And so it definitely leads to a lot of challenges. My kids are a little bit older, so it makes it a little bit easier for me to, I don't want to say compromise. Compromise is probably not the best word, but my wife definitely gets after me from time to time, saying that I need to disconnect. I like to hike up in the mountains, so I like to go where I have no cell reception, because it just makes it easy, right? Nobody can bother me there. But
it's hard. It's hard not to feel tethered because when you have it in your hand, there's only so much social media and websites and news and all of that. And then you go back to your inbox. You go back to what should I be doing? It's hard to not feel tethered to it. And that's the other side of the pandemic. Where our entire worlds became homebound for many of us, not all of us, many of us, and learning what that balance is and keeping our lives afloat.
Yep. And so many people I've talked to, they said, well, I work from home, but then I found myself, and even my staff, they would, wrap up at the end of the day, but then they would go back and check their email after they've had dinner, after they put the kids to bed. And I really had to, work with my staff to say, hey, you do need to disconnect. I appreciate all your hard work. However, you need to disconnect because, it shouldn't really consume your whole day. I mean, work is work, and you need to, definitely spend some quality time with your family. So, and it's been a challenge. It was a challenge for a lot of folks to be able to make that transition. But we had to make that abrupt transition, right? It was one of those that we had to, it was like 2 weeks to flatten the curve, and everybody was working from home.
And I think we're still finding that transition too. I mean, we're not back to normal yet. We're close. It feels more normal, but I think we still got a little ways to go before we kind of figure out and settle what that new normal is.
Yeah. And we've definitely added a lot of digital tools like this to be able to have these conversations. It is kind of nice to have more tools at our disposal. I really do wish that I would have bought stock in Zoom maybe in January leading up to March. But hey, hindsight's always 2020. So
it sure is.
Well, as executive director, Calvo is this is one of the things that, I've seen just in my short time in California. I've only been in California now for 7 years. But I've definitely seen that Calvo is a very large organization within the state of California. But it's also the largest chapter in our region. Our region is California, Nevada, and Hawaii. But what goes into kind of managing that managing Calvo and all the different facets? Because I'm aware of all the, not only just engaging code officials, right, but also too, there's a lot of training and things like that, anywhere from SoCal to NorCal. What goes into that to be able to manage such a large organization?
Well, thanks for asking. Calvo is unique, and we know we're unique. We wear that as a badge of honor, but we're actually ICC's largest chapter, and we love promoting that because, we feel cool, But I mean, the truth is we're 20% of the U.S. population, and when you look at California, we have so much diversity. We've got big cities. We've got our number one export is agriculture. There's just a lot of things about California that some folks understand because they're from here, and other folks can't even fathom. And I say that because you've got to figure out how to represent code officials, and it's not a transferable term. Being a code official in the rural parts of the Sierra Nevadas or in the Central Valley is very different by the types of code enforcement infractions, administration of the code, politically within councils and boards of supervisors, and working with those bodies. Very different than in urban Los Angeles or urban San Diego with those types of issues. And so you've got to find uniting factors. You've got to find things that brand or connect professionals together. Organizationally, when it comes to how do we approach code administration or how do we approach lobbying at the state level. I mentioned before, California is a full-time government. And so that means that we are routinely interacting with anywhere from 3,000 to 5,000 pieces of legislation that could have impacts on local government, code enforcement, building codes, regulation standards, et cetera. And then things that we might say, oh, that's not going to touch us, morphs into something that touches us or becomes such an issue for a city that it impacts our departments, et cetera. And so I always try to find those uniting factors. And what I have found is that we tend to be, professionally, we all tend to agree that we like local control. We like things that are going to work for our city or our jurisdiction better than the larger standards. So we focus there and trying to protect and preserve autonomy and saying what works for the city of Tracy doesn't have to work for the city of Los Angeles and vice versa. We look for other issues. We try to be as offensive as we can when it comes to decision makers. And what I mean by that is being proactive and saying, okay, decision maker, okay, lawmaker, how is it that we can be a resource to you? So that when you're sitting around and talking about how you want to install EV charging stations in every parking space in the state of California, okay, let's talk about the goal there, though. What is it that you're ultimately trying to achieve? And how is it that we can help you to achieve that goal, which might not be the way you're thinking we're going to achieve it, but maybe we can help you to get there another way that is going to be more enforceable at a local level and ultimately get them what they want. So when it comes to representation, to your question, not to tap dance too much, although I know I can be good at that, it's focusing on what unites us. It's focusing on how we're alike versus how we're different. Right now, we're planning our annual meeting. And so that means we have programming and sessions. And you always have to find topics that are going to work for everybody, but you also want to give enough of your specialized folks something to draw from. So, we usually have something in there on soft stories or seismic retrofits. Even if that only touches a part of our state, it's important to that part of the state. Then we look at other things like load path or egress or things that, might be more applicable in some areas than others, but, overall have a universal appeal. And then we're also lucky because ICC will call on us and say, hey, California, will you be our guinea pig? Will you try this out? Will you give it a shot? And that's exciting for us because if they sample it on us, they're getting about 20% of their membership based on that sample. And if they expand it to Region 1, I mean, you got most of the West right there. So, but it's not always easy. It doesn't always work. We certainly get criticism. You certainly you see the cultural divides between the North and the South. You see the differences of opinion, which is why you don't always see Calbo being really active in national code change proposals. We focus more on the state, but we certainly support the groups that go out there and promote more of the West Coast or California-driven code change proposals at the national level. It just doesn't always have our name on it. So long-winded way of saying, we figure it out, not always the easiest job, but problem solving and 40 million people keep it interesting.
Well, like you said, finding those things that unite us, right? Being able to find that common thread that keeps us together, and ultimately, what's that goal? I think that most of us, right, we're all working towards a safer built environment. That's one of the things that I think we're all working towards, and how do we accomplish that goal? And a lot of people have different perspectives on how to accomplish that goal, and what may work in the north may not work in the south, and vice versa, or work up in the mountains, and there is a lot of diversity within the state geographically, to be able to kind of come up and find that common thread. I'm sure that that is a big challenge, and I'm sure that it's very challenging at times. But somebody that is not a code official, you definitely know a lot, as you mentioned, load path and egress and those types of things. So I think you've picked a lot of that up through osmosis.
Don't challenge me though. I mean, I've dropped all my terms. I'm running out of them. So
I was surprised when you said I'm not a code official, but I'm like, man, all the terms that you just used, I'm like, it sounds like you're ready to be a building official like tomorrow. So
who do I hang out with? I mean, you got to look at the company I keep, or that keeps
right.
me for that matter. And it just kind of like, maybe it is osmosis, maybe it's just spending too much time together. But I'm glad some of it's rubbed off. That's good.
Yeah. Yeah, well, and I think that it leads to a lot more validity about what you speak about, especially when you've got I would imagine that part of your role is also to maybe communicate to, based on your previous work history and your previous kind of resume, to be able to have those conversations with different legislators. I'm imagining that you probably have some, maybe some former relationships that probably, help you in that path as the executive director.
You learn a lot growing up in politics in terms of, when you start your career, you just learn a lot. You learn about sensitivities, you learn about self-awareness, you learn about other people's agendas that may impact you or not impact you, but how you can steer that course. When you're working for an elected official, as many of us do in some way, shape, or form, and I would argue that most of us do if you consider a council or a political body like that, we tend to be black and white thinkers as code officials, but you get into the gray of you just got to make it happen because it's being directed by X, Y, or Z elected official. So you learn those things. But, I always describe myself as I have to be bilingual.
Okay.
I have to be able to speak the language of the government. I have to be able to go to them and water it down and not use terms like load path and egress and Title 24 and BC and IBC, and you can't use those acronyms in that audience. So you have to know how to make that applicable to them, how you can speak to a conservative legislator and talk about how, by going through these mitigation factors that we're going to be able to ultimately save money going that route. Or speaking to someone of the more progressive posture, as we do oftentimes in California, and saying, okay, I really like where you're headed with these initiatives. Perhaps we look at that incrementally so that we can find a way to get it into code or statute and make it stick so that we can ultimately achieve your goals along climate change or something like that. So you have to know how to speak to those audiences and how it's appropriate. And then you have to come back and you have to speak the other language, which is speaking to your group, your constituents, in this world, it's building officials. And so how do you come back and you can't go, oh, well, it got caught up in the appropriations committee and it got 28.8 and this happened and then we had a floor vote. Well, yeah, I mean, some folks can kind of figure that out and may know, but at the end of the day, you just have to say, politics trumped it this time and we're not going to get it through this year, or we had to make some compromises. And those compromises weren't exactly what we wanted, but we put our best foot forward. Right. And so it's knowing how to speak and engage which group at any given time and trying to translate that for who your audience is.
Okay. No, that's like you just said, being able to speak in terms that everybody understands and being able to generalize that same general topic across different, to different stakeholders is always very important. Like you mentioned, speaking in jargon sometimes is hard because the more you speak in jargon, the more that they don't understand and the strong likelihood that you're not going to be able to move what you want to move forward. So you mentioned that being able to stay on top of let's say 3,000 to 5,000 pieces of legislation a year. So how do you, for me, I just think about like what I need to stay on top of, code change wise and really what impacts me here locally. I look at nationally. I talk to people like you, but how do you stay involved? With the code industry, it's always evolving, but also too legislatively, things are always evolving. So how do you continue to kind of stay on top of it, learn, and just be prepared to be able to address and handle those topics?
Well, I kind of mentioned before, I have this really cool seat, and I don't know how else to describe it. But, I work for a nonprofit, but I spend a lot of time with private and public sector organizations, professionals, companies, whatever that may be. And so
Hmm.
when you have this seat, you can kind of see what everybody's doing, and you can kind of see what works and what doesn't. And
Right.
so I love the nonprofit space because you kind of get the best of both worlds.
Hmm.
You get, some of the advantages of being a public sector entity, not all of them, but at the same time, you don't have to operate as a public sector entity, and you can kind of borrow some of the good things out of the private sector, right?
Right.
So
Right.
when we're watching the private sector, that's where we see technology and
Hmm.
innovation and the ability to put out more technological advances and practices and things like that, that maybe the public sector can't quite pivot to get
Right.
to as quickly.
Hmm.
So it's kind of fun to operate in that space. The pandemic, we learned a lot very quickly.
Hmm.
It's Calbo operates on about a $2 million budget.
Okay.
And so of that, roughly about 65% of it we get from education and training. And I would argue about 10% comes in from sponsors or other resources that are coming private sector based. So it's not membership dues. Membership dues are important because the
Hmm.
membership is who we are as an identity.
Right.
But financially, that's not what we hang our hat on.
Hmm.
And so when you cut off in-person meetings as we trained, and you cut off our ability to allow a sponsor to come in and promote their service or their good or have a
Right.
booth or offer things like that, I mean, we were hurting.
Hmm.
And we figured out very quickly that we could take technology and utilize it effectively by putting commercials out, by
Okay.
doing virtual training. And where we talked about virtual training and we dabbled in virtual training, nobody wanted it. Nobody wanted
Hmm.
to touch it. And if they had the option of going and having some rubber chicken for lunch and hanging out with a group of people versus, sitting in front of their laptop and, not listening to guys like us, but,
Right.
sitting in front of their laptop,
Yeah.
most went for the rubber chicken. Okay, I
Yeah.
don't know what that says about us. But when it's necessitated, when it's required, it's a different story.
Hmm.
And so the pandemic gave us this opportunity as Calvo to roll out all of these new modalities that we had to roll out because if we didn't, we wouldn't survive.
Hmm.
And so we figured out how to effectively do virtual training, which wasn't Matt with his iPhone standing in the back of the classroom. It was
Right.
bringing in a full-time camera crew and putting multiple instructors in the room to deal with the not just the instructor that's being broadcast, not maybe just a handful of people that are allowed to be in the room, and by handful I mean 5 to 7,
Hmm.
or dealing with the students that have questions that want to engage but are behind a laptop.
Hmm. Hmm.
And the only way you can do that is by having multiple instructors do it. So you figure it out. So my long-winded way of answering your question is sometimes we're forced to
Yeah.
adopt change and accept change
Right.
and make it a part of our fabric as an
Hmm.
organization. And then other times you just look at what other people are doing and doing it well. And that's where I say that seed of being in the nonprofit. You can look around. You can look at all the cool stuff ICC is doing.
Yeah.
ICC does a lot of cool stuff. Look
Yep.
at this. Who else is doing a podcast like this? You
I was going
can't,
to say there's no other region that I'm aware of.
right.
So,
But how cool is that? And
yeah.
so you get this front row seat to seeing what all of these other people are doing really well and
Yep.
how you can maybe support what
Right.
other people are doing really well. And because
Yep.
you're not trying to get in that space, but also learn from what other people are doing well and how you can make that your own.
Right. Well, actually, that leads me to a couple of questions. So, you
Uh-oh.
mentioned a lot of virtual training, and I'm maybe now looking at hybrid training and the different things that you offer through Calvo. So, what resources do you provide to I would say not only just code officials here in the state, but also I would say probably globally, because I would imagine that you could if somebody was on the East Coast, they may be able to log into a virtual training here in California. It may not always be the same, but they might be able to get something from the CBC that they may be able to generalize to the IBC, or or other topics of consideration. Because I will say that when the pandemic happened, Calbo made that pivot really fast. And I know, I'm part of the Northern California Fire Prevention Officers Association, and we had to try to also pivot on how do we provide our annual conference as well. Like, how do we continue to do that? And so we did a lot of Zoom and a lot of virtual training. And like you said, we were kind of really forced to do it. I mean, you had to make that pivot, and you had to do it fast. But also, too, it's all things that we all considered for a long period of time, because you mentioned, a lot of us like to be able to, go to have that rubber chicken and sit in a classroom. And some of us, I'll be honest, as you sit in a class, I don't know if I get as much out of it sitting in class, or if I do it virtually where I'm in the comfort of my own office or my own home. I think I probably get a little bit of both. One thing that I do miss about being in person is the side conversations that I have with my peers, because I do think that I get something out of those as well. But with that being said, what resources does Calbo provide? You mentioned the ABM. You guys are preparing for the ABM, but what are some of those resources that, one, you offer code professionals that are members of the organization, but two, also like people that are not members that might be able to take advantage of some of the trainings that you offer?
So the public safety hat is really important to us, and realizing that, yes, as an organization, we have to sustain ourselves. We have to be able to pay our bills. I like to get paid. Thank you very much. And so we do have things that, we have to pay our dues in that respect. But being a public safety oriented organization, that means we also have to provide resources that are going to not just enhance our members, but the public as well. Code officials are fiduciaries, right? We're fiduciaries of public trust and promoting public safety. And so we have to be the ones out there, even if somebody, quote unquote, hasn't paid their dues, to be a part of your organization. So I remember when we redid our website, 3 or 4 years ago, we were very used to the login model, right? You come in and, Tim S, and then you put in your password, and then you would have all these resources available to you. And the IT consultant we were working with said, why are you locking all this stuff up? If these are really resources such as checklists, toolkits, here are ways to mitigate a disaster from happening in the first place. Here is a disaster response summary of how, when it does happen, because it is going to happen in California, how do you respond to that to save lives at the end of the day? And that resonated with us, and not going, hey, just because you haven't paid your $4.95 doesn't mean you're not allowed to have these tools. And what we found is that our members want to belong. It's not necessarily about, I'm paying that so that I get this. It's more of a connectivity of, I want to belong to this organization. And so we have to again, wear that hat with some pride and make sure that they want to continue to be involved. So I say that because that takes the financial element out of it, where we can focus on other things so that we can provide other member resources. So on the national and international spectrum, we've tried, especially in the pandemic, we really tried to beef up what we call toolkits, which are, ways that members, they're all available. They're all open on our website, calbo.org. calbo.org, where you can log in and go, okay, here's a toolkit, here's a checklist. Because when we talk to members, or we talk to folks, especially post disaster, we go in and they all go, man, I wish I would have known that I had these resources from FEMA, or that I had these issues from Cal OES, or that had I done this, I wouldn't have had to go through the bureaucracy of trying to get mutual aid, or trying to get other disaster response and recovery type tools. And so the more we can promote that from a mitigation standpoint, or the more we can help smaller jurisdictions. I mean, we all know what happened in Paradise. We've all seen these very small jurisdictions with limited resources that never saw something coming. Well, then that something came, and they've got big problems. And all of us can jump in to help, but we also have struggles in doing that, right? With red tape and bureaucracies and things like that.
Hmm.
So that's one thing we try and do. Now, in order to be able to do services like that, we have to pay the dues, right? We
Right.
have to be able to make some money, and we make our
Hmm.
money on our training.
Right.
I think some folks look at our training and they go, you might be a little pricier than some options, but I look at that and I go, okay, look at what you're getting from our training. We're Californians, right? Now
Right.
you and I are not from here, okay?
Right.
So I can say that. I feel like we've got a perspective where we can identify Californian, but you can smell someone that walks in the door who's not a California code official.
Yep.
And so our instructors and trainers are California code officials. They
Okay.
know the CBC. Now they may know the IBC really well too. They
Hmm.
probably do, but they
Right.
know the CBC and they know how what's applicable to Phoenix might not be applicable to Los Angeles.
Right.
So that's one thing you get. Two, if you take our virtual classes, you do not get a canned summation of a course. You get an
Hmm.
original course. Oftentimes, the instructor is going to be the author behind the course. And if it is a virtual class, you are not just going to get a feed of answering questions retroactively at the end because you can email the instructor. Not at all. We focus on the experience. We focus on the integrity of the training, and we want folks to, I mean, we all get a little tired of training classes. Sure, I mean, we like to learn, but it's still a long day of sitting in a classroom.
Oh
And
yeah.
so we try and make it as engaging as we possibly can, and we
Hmm.
really look at the student experience. And so, given that that's how we fund ourselves as an organization, we take it seriously. Sponsors, we embrace the private sector in California. We see a lot of great things that come out of, say, third party inspections or plan
Hmm.
check or access consultants or whatever it may be. We embrace that, and it's starting to be embraced nationally in
Hmm.
ICC circles. But in
Yep.
California, I think, third party has just been, a part of our jurisdictions for a long time. It's not quite so separate as it might be in other places. And
Right.
so, if we're going to partner with them, if we're going to take resources from them, we also have to give them what they need, which is an opportunity to recruit staff,
Hmm.
which is an opportunity to explain their services and how their services might be similar to a competitor or might be unique to them. And so all of these things we try to approach with integrity, we try to approach with balance, and we try to approach with when we take those monies in and bring it into the organization to make sure that there's plenty going back out, not just our community, but the public in general. The last thing I'll say is, for a long time, Calbo saw itself as an organization of building officials.
Hmm.
And we are. I mean, what's our
Oh yeah.
name?
Yep.
California Building Officials. But from there, we've really tried over the past 5 years to make a conscious effort to be more about local government,
Hmm.
to look at our fire official friends, and
Yep.
again, look at how much we agree on, how we approach things through the same lens of public
Yeah.
safety and mitigation and
Yep.
things like that, especially FPOs.
Yeah.
And how we have so many commonalities right there, and how our voice can be strong in local government and promoting to decision makers, how we're
Hmm.
not just an inspector, or we're not just a plan checker, we're not just, maybe a mid-department head. We are leaders.
Yeah.
We are bringing in money to your city that is enabling other things to happen. And at the end of the day, we know what we're doing because we're required to have training that ensures that when we go out there that we're really protecting the public. So we try and wear that hat as a local government representative, with a lot of pride, and
Hmm.
speaking with more of an authoritative stance on who we are as contributors to local government.
Okay. Yeah, like you said, being able to have that partnership, like I've known Calbo for quite a while, and I've unfortunately not been to one of your conferences yet. I know one of these days. I keep telling myself it's gonna happen, but because you got I think you host a conference in San Ramon. Is that the northern side of things? And so I've got to sign up for that one. That's the one I want to try to get to because it's just really over the hill from where I'm at right now. So I could
We're
definitely
moving.
be there. And
Tim, we're moving. I'm sorry. We are
oh,
moving to
you're
Berlin.
moving.
This was our last year in San
Oh,
Antonio, so you're going to have to go to the other side of the bay if you
oh,
want to see us. Now, that's just our education conference. So we do anywhere from 2 to 4.
okay.
So our home base was San Ramon, Ontario. We're moving
Yeah.
both. So we're moving to
Okay.
Burlingame and then Costa Mesa in the south. And then our annual meeting roams around. around. And so our
Okay.
annual meeting this year's in San Diego. So you know a
Oh,
guy. You don't have
yeah.
an excuse to come see us.
Yeah, I've definitely got to make the travel. Burlingame, I was just in Burlingame on Friday. The traffic coming back, I would have to stay up, of course, because being stuck in Bay Area traffic is not always the most fun thing to do on a Friday afternoon.
Very tough.
Um, so, but with that being said, I would imagine that you offer not only just classes for building officials, but also fire code officials as well, right? There is a lot of similarities to what we do. And a lot of, I'm sure that for any other fire prevention officers that are listening, that they could benefit from going to a Calpo conference. Is that correct?
I'd like to think so. I
Yeah,
think we have a lot to talk about because it's funny whenever you get a building official and a fire official in the room, there never
yeah,
seems to be any, blank space or stale air. There's always an opportunity to talk. But absolutely, a lot of people don't know that an agreement was signed. Oh man, I was around, but it was a while ago. Between the NorCal FPOs, the SoCal FPOs, and Calvo, where we
yep,
all agreed to offer membership pricing within
yep,
each other's organization. And it wasn't a money thing, or it was more of a trying to kind of encourage that cross pollination
yep,
between our conferences and getting more of us to just kind of talk.
right.
So that's the idea behind it. But no, I mean, we love a fire official. I mean, who doesn't love a badge in the audience?
Yeah, well, I try not to wear it if at all possible because it attracts a lot more attention. And so
Words.
sometimes I have to wear it, and sometimes I wear a polo like I am today. So now you mentioned recruitment to be able to talk about recruitment a little bit. I will say that most of us as code officials are, we're aging, and we're not necessarily seeing this large influx of younger people coming into the profession. I've mentioned before on this podcast, I've always tried to recruit my 19-year-old son into this type of profession, and he says absolutely not. I even tried to talk my 16-year-old daughter into it this morning, and she's like, "No, Dad, I'm going to go be a physical therapist. So I have no interest in this." And I said, "Oh, okay. Well, so I have no legacy after I retire. It's just done. Neither one of them want to have anything to do with what I do." But with that being said, how do we recruit people? Like ICC has, like you mentioned, ICC being, California being the testing ground for a lot of ICC things. They have the technical training program where we try to recruit new people that can go into high schools or go into technical colleges, work through that training piece. And by the end of the training, they have at least the residential building inspector certification by the time they exit. But how does Calbo work to try to recruit and show benefit to younger people to try to bring them into the profession?
It's tough. It's a tough question. And you already mentioned ICC. They're trying really hard.
Hmm.
And I love the initiatives they're putting out there. The Emerging Leader Program,
Yep.
um, Codes 2.0. I mean, there's a lot of efforts
Yeah.
in that. But I think what you have to look at is I think sometimes we're change adverse, right? We
Hmm.
go, well, but no, we always have our banquet on the first Friday of December
Yeah.
because that's when my wife likes to put a dress on and go to the dinner. And we can kind of laugh uncomfortably about what I just said, but it's the truth. That was a mindset that is no longer relevant because now it's not just that quote unquote, excuse me for saying it, good old boys network. We've
Hmm.
evolved, we've changed.
Right.
And so when we're looking at recruitment and we're looking at those types of things, I think we have to be cognizant of the world around us.
Hmm.
Okay, so you shared your age. I'm the same age. We're both Gen Xers,
Yep.
barely. And so as Gen Xers are different than millennials and what we're going to have as Zennials.
Yep.
We're different in the sense of how we connect and how we see organizations.
Hmm.
So when the millennials that get a very, very poor reputation, which is just coming from a perspective that is a different perspective,
Hmm.
um, entered the workforce, what was going on? We were in a recession.
Yep.
The public sector had ended most, if not all, recruitment efforts.
Yep.
You either froze positions or eliminated open positions.
Yep.
And so the public sector wasn't enticing when
Right.
millennials were graduating from college or entering the workforce. And so a lot of times I don't think we ever pay attention to what we did to kind of create a problem that
Right.
we have today. So
Yep.
the public sector, I love seeing the public sector innovate. I love seeing different, and we're seeing a lot of it in California. We're
Hmm.
seeing the adoption of public-private partnerships. We're seeing that as okay. We're seeing outsourcing as okay, meaning that we don't necessarily have to tie a pension to a person and have long-term finance commitments because we're able to meet the needs in other places. Now, does that get us around other issues that might touch upon organized labor or
Hmm.
liability or other bigger political issues? Perhaps. But when we're looking at innovation and change and we're looking from within, we're looking at how the public sector can do a better job of trying to be a place that a younger person or
Right.
somebody entering the workforce would want to go to. And I think those are all really good efforts. When I attend any one of our conferences, ICC, FPOs, Calbo, I hear the same thing from the third party folks. We
Hmm.
have the work. The city of Tracy's continuing to put it out and keep us busy. We don't have the people to
To
do the
do
work.
it. Right.
And so, what is it we can be doing? I love some of the ICC initiatives where they've been looking at
Hmm.
apprenticeships,
Yep.
where they've been looking at wounded warriors, where
Hmm.
they've been looking at different folks that might be mid-career inclined to come into the profession. But where I think we're all struggling is how do we grab that person right out of school?
Right.
How do we grab that person right out of starting service in a professional service or starting their
Hmm.
job?
Yep.
So what I think we also have to do is we also have to I love generational stuff. You hit me right here because I love talking about this. We have to look at how the generations and what people are looking for.
Right.
And younger folks want to feel meaningful. They want to
Yes.
feel like they're contributing. They have to intrinsically feel that they are somehow giving back.
Hmm.
And I don't know how we as the public sector have missed that mark because there's no better way to give back than by serving your community.
Right.
In this profession in particular, how is it that we serve our community? By keeping them safe.
Right.
And so I think us as organizations need to do a better job of connecting
Hmm.
what younger folks are looking for and being that bilingual or speaking in their language to show how we can give you what you're looking for in terms of professional fulfillment. And here's how. It's not the reach that you might think it is. Now, that comes with also understanding that we're the public sector for the most
Right.
part. We've
Yep.
got bureaucracy.
Yep.
When you want to take off next year to do the Spirit Quest in Argentina, that might be difficult.
Right. Right.
But
Right.
what we can do is we can offer more flexibility in scheduling. What we
Yeah.
can do is offer great benefits in the long run,
Right.
short run as well. And
Yeah.
at the end of the day, if what you're looking for is fulfillment and feeling
Hmm.
like you're giving back, I mean, we got that one nailed. We just have to explain it better.
Yeah, and I guess I hadn't considered what you mentioned, this vacuum that was created around the Great Recession. There was that vacuum, like you mentioned, that we eliminated a lot of positions. I know that that was about the time that I started my career as a fire code official. I started in 2000, was it 2005? And so by 2008, that Great Recession was starting to hit. And so I was on, potentially going to lose my job because there were just, we're dealing with some funding issues, and so there was some challenges, and seeing that, and then how do you come out of that and then recruit somebody to come back into the profession, and one to be able to show them that you value them when I think not really no sector, private or public, was spared during the Great Recession. We all had challenges, but then how do you recruit? You almost missed probably 8 to 10 years of trying to get somebody into this profession, and then how do you come back and how do you connect, and maybe part of it's branding. For me, like, I look at part of kind of what we're doing trying to recruit new people is kind of what we're doing in fire prevention right now. Fire prevention is, a lot of us have branded ourselves as community risk reduction. And so what does community risk reduction mean? Because fire prevention is only one piece of that. And so now we're trying to rebrand ourselves and then be able to communicate that out to to all the, our communities, and be able to share that message and be able to, try to mitigate that risk. And what do we do, and how do we do that? And I think a lot of it is messaging and trying to be able to connect with people. And I think that that's one of the biggest challenges that we do have. A lot of us have, because we get so entrenched in our ways. And we always have to explore new alternatives. I was just having a conversation with my operations chief, and he's about the same age as us. And we were talking about virtual reality training. I said, "Hey, I've got this company that I just made contact with in Sausalito. They have confined space training. They have fire extinguisher training. They have CPR training, and it is all through virtual reality." And they keep adding modules. And I said, and he goes, and so one of the conversations that we had is as we talk about being able to utilize that, not just in the community, but also internally, we're all about tradition. And so a lot of times we want to go, like we talked about, eating the rubber chicken and going to conferences and doing that type of stuff. We've got to be able to change that tradition and that culture within to also now have that impact and be able to find value in that. And I'm still, I'm kind of really at the edge of trying to get this thing and be able to move it forward and be able to advance it. And what does, virtual reality training look like for community risk reduction training, but also internal training? And then how do I have, what do we do and how do we incorporate that? And I think that those are all things that we talk about, being able to find ways to relate to younger people. I think that is one, finding things that, meeting them where they're at, and how do we do that? And I have a hard time sometimes relating to my teenage kids because they've had a cell phone in their hand since they were probably 8 years old. And so they know how to do by far more on that cell phone than I ever probably will. I think I'm pretty good, but I'm not nearly as good as what they are. Like, I have a Snapchat account. I think I've logged into it one time. I don't even know how to use it. Like that's kind of where I'm at.
But look at what that education and that rearing has done in terms of how your kids, as now young adults, see the world. They have never had to wait for information.
Right.
They have always had it instantaneously. And so that's how they approach many things.
Yeah.
They don't understand the need to wait or why they can't get something quickly. So us as Gen Xers, we look at it and go, you pay your dues. You wait your turn. You take your time. You figure it out. You go open the encyclopedia. If it's not there, you go to that collection, National Geographics over there, which doesn't seem fathomable or plausible to folks that have known their entire life how to just punch in, Google something, and it comes up. But I think our chapters, I kind of alluded to it before, and I made kind of a bad joke about how, the old holiday banquet used to work in chapters, but it's true. And the analogy I'm trying to create there is that our chapters are struggling with getting people in the room. And when you go to many chapters, at least, throughout, Region 1 circles, as I get to do, you see a heavy predominance of consultants in the room. And you're seeing fewer and fewer public sector employees. And I look at that and I go, why are we not looking at the root cause? And in my opinion, the root cause is if you can't get somebody to leave their jurisdiction and attend a lunch or a breakfast or an afternoon meeting or whatever it is, it's that you're not providing value for their time. It's that time is the commodity that they're concerned about. So if you're a large chapter like the Los Angeles Basin chapter and you're having your in-person meeting on the west side of Los Angeles and you're, an East LA jurisdiction, you're not driving across town to go to that.
Right.
But through the pandemic, we've learned other ways of reaching those folks that are more time sensitive. They'll log on to something for half an hour or 45 minutes because they're connecting with people differently. They're connecting through podcasts. They're connecting through social media. They're connecting through, if they really have a question, they're going to type it into a listserv, or they're going to type it into some type of an internal dialogue where they can get that information instantaneously, versus what you said, how you miss going to the meetings because you could have your questions answered in the coffee clutch out in the hallway.
Right.
Now, I like that too. But when you're looking at how you can attract the younger generation, when you're looking at how we can regrow our chapters and get them strong again, like they used to be in terms of numbers, I think sometimes we're remiss in not looking at how we need to change ourselves because our audience has changed. And what our chapter members are looking for is different than that chapter member 20 years ago.
True.
The holiday banquet isn't quite the same level of importance to a lot of newer chapter members, where they're looking for the information they need in a quick way of obtaining it, but also being able to connect with a group of people that might just not be over lunch in person in a room.
Right.
And we don't think anything has to go away. I think we just need to be finding that hybrid way of meeting all of our needs by recognizing that one size fits all as a chapter isn't the right approach. I'll
Right.
get up my soapbox.
Well, no, actually, I think that this is probably something, for me, I think that this is the biggest question, the biggest concern that many of us have. Being part of the Cal Chiefs Fire Prevention Officers Association, we're also struggling being able to get, public officials into our meetings. I mean, we have one meeting a month, and typically it's on a Friday. And we do struggle from time to time on attendance. And how do we meet those, newer code officials and bring those, code officials into the mix, or even some, code officials that, throughout the pandemic, they would attend meetings up to the pandemic and then they just didn't come back. And how do we re-engage those folks? And those are all things that, somebody has another chapter trying to be able to find that common thread and be able to, like you mentioned, I had this conversation with a couple other folks not that long ago, was we got to be able to show value. And you just said it right there, is being able to try to show value. What is that value? Being able to get somebody in their car to be able to drive across, LA to be able to get to a meeting, but maybe we meet them where they're at, and be able to find, because ultimately, that information is going to be good, but whether or not they get, drive across town to be able to get there and spend 4 hours in traffic to get to that meeting, they may not want to do that. But hey, can we do a hybrid meeting of some type? And I think that so many of us are trying to do it, but sometimes we don't do it really well. And so what is it? Like, we have a device called the Owl. I don't know if you're familiar with it, but it's like it's about the size of this microphone, and it's got a little camera at the top, and you have a 360-degree view, and it focuses on the people that are talking. And so something new, but also too, we're not really good about trying, now we're all having to be IT professionals, and like, being a Gen Xer, I can do some things. I can operate my iPhone pretty well. I can do some other things, but when it doesn't work, I don't know what to do. Like, and so being able to maybe engage the younger folks to be able to help us be able to figure some of these things out, like, knowing what a dongle is and how I connect it to, from my laptop to my iPhone or whatever. Sometimes I just get lost. And so I'm surprised that I'm able to make this podcast work. I don't know how, by the grace of God, it all works. But being able to meet them where they're at, and I think the hybrid model is going to be something that we have to really try to emphasize. Like you said, showing value, and that value is going to be really important, not only to, younger folks, but also our continued membership and continue to grow that.
And there's no reason why we can't, And
Yeah.
sorry, I could talk for hours about this, and I won't, because you won't let me. But I mean, truth be told, there's no reason why we can't, because code officials, we're not change adverse.
Right.
Sometimes we think we're a little more rigid than we are. We adopt a new code every 3 years.
Yep.
We have an intervening cycle every 18 months. And so
Yep.
we're used to change. We're used to
Yeah.
having to figure new things out. We're
Right.
used to getting political decisions that are forced upon us that we then have to figure out.
Right.
So my point is we can make changes.
Yeah.
We are already open to it. It's just kind of integrating it into our own culture, which is our chapters and
Right.
the way we connect as a profession. And we're getting there. I mean, the Owl, I mean, how cool is that?
Yeah.
And giving more of that experience of being in the room, even if you're not in the room, where maybe some folks that don't have the 4 hours for traffic can't be in the room, but they can feel like they're in the room. And still, if they have a question or they want to participate with the speaker over lunch or ask questions of whatever program is being given, we're finding the ways to do that. And we just have to accept that that's going to be somewhat of our normal. And at the end of the day, that's going to be our salvation as organizations, because that's what's ultimately going to keep us bound or connected in some way, shape, or form.
Yeah, I don't disagree. I think that being able to, be able to connect and continue to connect, and as you mentioned, change is hard for some, but we're always asked to change. And that's one of the things that I have, like you, I lived in Colorado for a bit. I was in Colorado Springs and Estes Park and loved it. I still miss Colorado. I consider it to be my home. Now, granted, I grew up in Omaha. I grew up in the Midwest, but we always vacationed in Estes Park and Colorado. So I miss Rocky Mountains. I miss it. I miss seeing Pikes Peak every day. There are worse things. So my wife and I talk about it often. So when we retire, Colorado may be calling because I do miss kind of seeing that. Now, I don't miss the winters because it's awful cold right there right now, but I don't miss that. But I've had to adapt to change. I was a code official in Iowa. I was an Iowa deputy state fire marshal for a bit. I moved to Colorado. I was in Estes Park, worked there for a bit, went to Colorado Springs, worked there for a bit, and then came to California. And being in California, I've worked in a couple different agencies now, and so each agency has its own culture, and you have to adapt to that culture, and part of that's change. And I don't think change should always be thought negatively. And so you gotta try to, but you gotta kind of roll with it and gotta understand that sometimes it can be hard, and but it doesn't always have to be. Just because we're, like you mentioned, we have the banquet on the third Friday of the month, and that's just because we have it that time all the time. We don't have to continue that. And we're actually talking about that with our California Fire Prevention Officers Institute this year, talking about, hey, we normally do a banquet, but maybe it's not a banquet. Maybe it's something else. Maybe we need to, kind of vary it a little bit so that way we can continue to provide more value to our membership.
But talk about a huge change. I mean, we called that conference Buellton. That's what it is referred to. Yeah. And so I'm so excited for the FPO community moving to Santa Barbara. I mean, I like Santa Barbara and I can fly there. Yes, that is a plus. But I'm so excited that change has occurred, and there's going to be some hiccups, and it's not easy, but the Band-Aid was pulled off on a place that you just couldn't meet anymore. And I'm so excited for the FPO community to see what happens in 2023, because I think it's going to be awesome.
Yeah, I will tell you that the group that is working to put it together, it has worked tirelessly. They have put in a lot of time and a lot of effort to be able to get to us where we're at. I mean, like we really outgrew Buellton, right? And so now they're going to offer more, and I just think it's going to continue to grow and develop and really be of great significance. And I think that as we talked about California being kind of the proving ground, I really do think that a lot of places look to California to be able to see how we do things. And I think that we have to be adaptable to be able to address those needs. So, Matt, we are just a little over an hour, so we could continue this conversation. But with that being said, I hate to draw the conversation to a close, so maybe there will be a 2.0 in the future. But we talked about a lot of things. So where can our listeners find some of the resources, the different things that we talked about in today's episode?
We're easy to find. I represent CALBO, California Building Officials, calbo.org. I'd like to think there's a wealth of information available at your fingertips on that website. Anybody that ever wants to connect with me, that's also an easy way to find me. So I'll just direct you to the website, as every PR consultant tells you to do. But all kidding aside, that's the greatest place to find information we've talked about today, or reach out to me directly.
All right. Fantastic. Well, that does bring our episode to a close. I want to thank Matt and Calbo for being, a guest on our illustrious ICC Region 1 Radio. Not award-winning yet. I'm going to say yet, but eventually. But I want to thank him for being here. But like I always mention, if you know of other folks that we can definitely have on as guests, please make sure to send them our way. We'll be more than happy to showcase them and be able to share their experiences on this show. Make sure to rate and review us on Apple Podcasts and subscribe to our YouTube channel. Thank you, everybody. Thanks, Matt.
Grateful. Thanks.